Good evening, I'm Illuminate Faulkner, and welcome to the Detroit Church of Christ Midweek service. And I'm just going to give a few announcements, and then after that, Kevin Quist is going to preach the word for us. So, Sunday, July 5th, we're going to begin having outdoor services. Now, of course, those services are going to be live streamed, and it'll be at 11 a.m., and it'll be at Ford Field, and right beside Field 2, where if you've played softball with us in the past, that's often where we've had many of our softball games. And speaking of softball, it'll also be starting July 5th. And this Sunday, the 28th, is the last day to register for softball. And so if you haven't already done so and plan to play softball, please go on our website and register, and so that you can be considered during the draft, which takes place this upcoming Monday. And then as far as our offering is concerned, if you are unclear how to give, we are posting at the end of every video basically detailed instructions on how to give your offering. And last announcement is a great announcement. In this day and age of stay at home and not being able to meet together, good news doesn't travel as fast. And so excited to share that Jose and Jesse Jimenez gave birth to a son. Well, Jose didn't do the giving birth, but you get what I mean. And born June 19th is Theodore Edward Jose Jimenez. And so if you haven't already extended congratulations, feel free to do so. But they have brought a newborn son into the world. With that, I pass things over to Kevin Quist.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Detroit Church of Christ Wednesday evening online service. My name is Kevin Quist, and I'm happy to be bringing the lesson to you this evening. Hope this has been a great week for you, a great day. Actually, in the Bible tonight, we're going to be reading about some people that had a very rough day and looking at how they handled that and what we can learn from them. But before we get into the lesson, following the great tradition of our church for Wednesday evenings, I'm going to begin with a couple of jokes. I used to work in a factory making calendars, but one day I got fired and I have absolutely no idea why. All I did is take a day off 1 month. Go figure. I have a lot of friends that are vegetarians, but in my opinion, that is just one big mistake. Think about that. For those of you that are still tuned in, we're going to go on to the lesson. So over the last month or so, there have been a number of lessons on the theme of making simple decisions to change our life. There have been lessons on taming the tongue, not complaining, making the best, giving your best in every situation. So tonight, I want to talk about the decision to get out of the boat. And we'll learn what that means as we get into the scriptures. Tonight, I'm going to be reading entirely from Matthew chapter 14. So let's go ahead and begin reading from verse 22. Immediately, Jesus made the disciples get into the boat and go on ahead of him to the other side, while he dismissed the crowd. After he had dismissed them, he went up on a mountainside by himself to pray. Later that night, he was there alone, and the boat was already a considerable distance from land, buffeted by the waves because the wind was against it. Shortly before dawn, Jesus went out to them, walking on the lake. When the disciples saw him walking on the lake, they were terrified. "It's a ghost," they said, and cried out in fear. Let's try to get into the shoes of the apostles in this situation and understand what they might have been feeling and going through. So all night long, it talks about the fact that they are fighting against the wind and the waves to get to the other side of the lake. And Jesus is not with them until the very end, of course, when he shows up and scares them to death because he looked like a ghost to them. But even before this, it has been an emotionally extremely challenging day for the apostles. We're not going to read it, but earlier in chapter 14, earlier in the same day, Jesus and the apostles learned that John the Baptist has been beheaded. And this is so emotionally impactful to Jesus himself that he needed to get some time away just by himself to pray to God. But it must have affected the apostles as well, because they must have known him, and at least John and Andrew had been his disciples at one point. John the Baptist was their mentor, their teacher, their friend. So you can imagine there was an atmosphere of just great sorrow and sadness and maybe discouragement and perhaps a lot of fear, because if this could happen to John the Baptist, it could happen to us. Then Jesus feeds the 5,000 men along with the women and children. But before he does, actually he tells the apostles to feed them, but they can't do it. They fail, and Jesus ends up having to do the miracle himself. And again, when I put myself in the shoes of the apostles, how might I have felt? I could have felt a sense of failure. Once again, I've let Jesus down. I haven't pleased him. And then they get in the boat at night. And as we've read, they were on the lake. Now, to me, just that by itself, being in a lake in the middle of the night with wind and waves, and it's dark outside, that would be terrifying. That would be nerve-wracking in and of itself to me. But also it says that they're fighting and not making much progress. So you can imagine that perhaps they're feeling some frustration. And also they had been up for about 24 hours. It says that this went on until about almost dawn the next day. So they're probably physically just exhausted by the end of this. And on top of this, Jesus isn't with them in the boat. It's a rough day. And you can imagine that they were experiencing all kinds of emotions on this day. Sorrow, maybe a sense of failure, exhaustion, frustration, fear, anxiety, all these things just in this one day. Can you relate to any of those emotions in your life recently? I know that I can. It has been a wild roller coaster of a year in 2020. First with the coronavirus lockdown, and then the protests against racism and police brutality. And perhaps those have brought about a whole range of emotions in your life as well. I know many of us have experienced sorrow at losing loved ones, and fear and anxiety about the fact that we ourselves or our loved ones could get the virus. I think a lot of the mothers in particularly have just felt exhausted, taking care of the kids that have to stay home all day, every day. And I really want to lift you up and hold you in esteem for all the love and hard work that you've shown over the last few months. Fathers too. I think a lot of us have felt great frustration over the social injustice that we've been witnessing. And perhaps in the middle of all these situations, being at home so much, a lot of us have been battling with inner sin, and we have not been as successful as we would like to be. And you're just feeling distant from God. You know, the good news is that for the apostles, even though they're feeling all of these kind of things in this one day, Jesus hadn't abandoned them. He still loved them. He was still with them. And this was all just part of a great story that would end with Jesus doing something powerful in their lives. And the same is true for us if we'll just keep our faith in these difficult times. But let's keep on reading, because something amazing happens next. But Jesus immediately said to them, "Take courage, it is I. Don't be afraid." "Lord, if it's you," Peter replied, "tell me to come to you on the water." "Come," he said. Then Peter got down out of the boat, walked in the water, and came toward Jesus. Amazing. Peter, he gets out of the boat. Despite the fact that he had had a rough day, just like all the other apostles, he has the pure, childlike faith to conclude that if Jesus can walk on the water, then by faith in God, I should be able to also. And I bet Jesus wants me to come to him. But you have to think that, at least to a certain degree, before Peter got out of the boat, he had to consider the risks involved in this action. I mean, all kinds of bad things could have happened in a worst-case scenario, right? Maybe Jesus was tired, he wasn't up to doing miracles. Maybe I would embarrass Jesus. Maybe he's going to rebuke me again. This might have caused some friction with the other apostles. They might think that I'm trying to show off or get a special place with Jesus. And I might fail. I might drown. I mean, worst case scenario, all kinds of things could have gone wrong with this idea of Peter's to get out of the boat. And you have to note that none of the other 11 apostles are jumping in to join Peter in this action. No one is there like Jonathan's armor bearer saying, hey, I'm with you, heart and soul, let's go. They're kind of like, I'll just sit this one out and wait and see what happens. So the question for us is, do you tend to be more like Peter or the other 11 apostles? When you see an opportunity to do something great for God by faith, do you take it with a pure, the childlike faith that Peter displayed? Or do you tend to just think about everything that might go wrong with this? All the reasons that it might not go well? Or perhaps you just tend to be so caught up in whatever the emotional challenges are in your life at that time that your only ambition is to just get to the other side. Peter, just get back in the boat. So that you don't even see the opportunities that exist that God has put in front of you at that time. I believe that God wants all of us to imitate the faith that Peter displayed in this situation and to get out of the boat. But what does that even mean? To get out of the boat? I believe, the way that I think about this, it's something that God has commanded you to do, or God has promised that you can do, but the risk in case of failure is big, and it's scary, and it requires a level of faith that takes you way out of your comfort zone. Let me just give a few examples from my own life to help you to begin to think about what it might mean in your life to get out of the boat. Initially, for me, it meant taking the huge leap of faith that it required just to become a disciple of Jesus when I was 19 years old. I was a student at the University of Florida, and I was very much into the partying college scene, so much so that I earned the dubious title of floor drunk in my dormitory. And actually, after one semester, I was put on probation by the university because of a prank that I pulled against a frat house. And that's the kind of life I was living. But when I studied the Bible, I decided this is right, this is good, and I want to be a disciple. But honestly, the way that I was thinking at that time was that this is good and I'm going to do it, but I am going to be so bored for the rest of my life. No parties, no drunken parties, no pranks, no blowing off the weekend to do whatever I want. Where's the fun in all that? But I stepped out. It was like closing my eyes and jumping off the high dive at a pool, not knowing when I was going to hit the water. But God came through. And my life as a disciple for 40 years has just been one adventure after another. At another point, it meant being honest about something that I had done. It was about 30 years ago when I was living in Japan, and I was working for a company, and one day I just was feeling, down about something, and I decided to call in sick, even though I wasn't sick. And afterward, my conscience was stricken, and I decided I can't do this. So I met with my boss, and I told him, I'm sorry, but I lied. I wasn't sick that day. I just didn't want to come into work. And for me, that was really scary to do, but I knew it was right. And it's something that, for me, at that time, was getting out of the boat. In recent years, it has meant making a decision to deal with a particular sin, a weakness of mine, namely my tendency to get upset at my wife, Mariko, when we have a difference of opinion over something. So I decided that whenever we discuss something and we're not on the same page and I'm beginning to feel frustrated or angry, I'm just going to hold her hand. And we're going to keep holding hands until we talk the issue through, based on the thinking that there's no issue, there's no topic that's more important than us being united and being together. But it took faith, it took overcoming fear for me to do that, because once I made that declaration to her and to my kids and to my close brothers that I was going to do that as a matter of policy, well, if I didn't do it, I would look like a fool. I would look like a hypocrite. So for me, that was getting out of the boat. I think for all of us, to deal radically with sin like that and do something where we're going to be accountable, it takes overcoming fear and it takes faith in God. And that can mean that can be a form of getting out the boat for all of us. For many times, for me as a disciple of Jesus over the years, it has meant imitating Jesus and the apostles in sharing my faith boldly. One time when I was in Japan, I think this was in the early 90s, and the movie JFK had just come out. You might recall that movie. But at that time, our church was having a campaign or something like that. We're just trying to invite a lot of people to church. And so me and a couple other brothers went to the movie at a theater, and I decided that, hey, after the movie ends, I want to stand up and just invite everyone to our church. And I thought maybe there'd be maybe 20 or 30 or something like that. But we went in there, and we got in, and the theater was so much bigger than I was imagining. Plus, it was packed. There were probably 100, 200 people in the theater, and it was scary. And I sat down, and we were in the front row. And I remember watching the movie, and along the way, I just decided this is just too scary. There's just no way I can do this. But I don't know if you've seen the movie, but at the end, after it finishes, they put up a quote of JFK, and I can't remember it exactly, but it said something to the effect of, "The hottest parts of hell are reserved for those who know they should speak up but fail to do so." And it was like, oh no, now I have no choice but to stand up and invite these people. So I did. About 15 or 20 seconds, just told him about how this movie reminds me of Jesus. He's one who stood up for the truth, invited them all to church. Now, I don't think, it doesn't mean that sharing your faith boldly doesn't have to mean that for everybody. It can be something as simple as asking your friend to come over for tea and sharing your faith with them. It can be inviting that intimidating coworker to come to church. But I think for all of us, getting out of the boat in one way or another is going to involve having the boldness and the faith, the courage to share our faith and to talk to people about Jesus Christ, invite them to church and study the Bible with them. There are so many other ways of getting out of the boat, things that could mean. It might mean just being open about what's really going on in your life. Simple decision, but it can be scary. It might mean forgiving someone where you have a strained relationship. And that requires overcoming fear a lot of times because you never know how the other person is going to respond. It might mean submitting in a relationship that the Bible calls you to submit in. That can be scary. It might mean taking that step of faith and getting out of a work situation that is not good for you or your family spiritually. It might mean not avoiding conflict and talking to that person, that brother or sister that needs your help to become more like Jesus. It might mean allowing someone in your life to mentor you and to help you, to walk with you, to help you to be more like Jesus. It might mean just overcoming the fear of public speaking and volunteering to do the communion or the welcome or something like that at church. For some of us, it might mean asking a sister out on a date. For some people, I think it means making the decision to pursue going into the full-time ministry or becoming an elder and just declaring that and asking the ministry staff, train me, help me, and teach me. Again, it can mean 1,000 different things to all of us. It's going to mean different things at different stages in our life. But the question is, what does it mean for you today to get out of the boat? It should mean something for all of us. And my prayer in preparing this lesson has been that God is going to put something specific on the heart of every single person listening to this lesson. But let's keep on reading. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid, and beginning to sink, cried out, "Lord, save me." Immediately Jesus reached out his hand and caught him. "You of little faith," he said, "why did you doubt?" Peter fails. Until now, we've been talking about how great Peter did, exercising faith and having courage and getting out of the boat. But he ends up failing. Why is that? It says that he took his eyes off Jesus. He began to look at the wind, all the reasons why he should not be able to be walking on this water. He got afraid, he doubted, and he sank. And maybe in your life until now, you've stepped out of the boat in many, many ways that we've talked about, in many other ways. But like Peter, in the end, you failed. You ended up sinking. And that can be a devastating experience. And it can leave a deep, deep scar on our faith that can be very, very difficult to recover from. You trusted God, but it didn't go the way that you thought. And it's difficult to try again, to get out of the boat. And, if that has been your experience, we can analyze it. We can think about maybe this technique was wrong. Maybe this approach was wrong. I should have done it like this. We can think about it until the cows come home. But if we've stepped out on faith and yet we failed like Peter here, the reason is always the same. You began with your eyes fixed on Jesus, but somewhere along the way, for whatever reason it was, you began to look at the wind and the waves, to doubt, and then you sank. It is never more complicated than that. We should not fool ourselves that it is. That is so important. The great thing about Peter, though, is that he never gave up. He kept on getting out of the boat all the way until the end of his life. So often when we sink and we fail, we end up pulling back and deciding, I'm never going to make that mistake again. I'm never going to trust. I'm never going to believe. I'm never going to step out with courage again. The only goal that I have in life at this point is to get to the other side of the lake. All I want to do is make it to retirement. All I want to do is have a comfortable life where there's not much conflict. All I want to do is just to be a good Christian. I'm not asking for miracles. I just want a smooth life. You know, when we get like this, we get to the point where we read the promises of Jesus and we always take them with a grain of salt. We never fully believe them or take them seriously. We don't want to pray specific things because we're afraid that they won't be answered. It's going to hurt my faith even more. The great thing, though, about Jesus, Peter never gave up, and Jesus never gave up on Peter. He just kept on teaching, putting him through experiences that would build his faith. And some of those experiences were difficult. Some of those experiences were encouraging. Others were very humbling. In Matthew 15, we read about the Canaanite woman who came to Jesus wanting her daughter healed. And after a discussion between those two, Jesus ends up healing her daughter and says, "Woman, you have great faith." Now, this comes shortly after Matthew 14. And you can see the contrast there, and you have to believe that part of this was to teach Peter. In Matthew 14, Peter, you have little faith. In Matthew 15, woman, you have great faith. And you have to put yourself in Peter's shoes. As a Jew at this time, from a cultural point of view, he had every reason to look down on and disrespect this woman. First of all, she was a woman. She was a Gentile. She didn't know the Bible like Peter and the other apostles did. She wasn't an apostle, certainly. She wasn't even a disciple of Jesus. She'd only known him for about 5 minutes. And yet Jesus took this woman and used her to teach Peter how to have faith. You know, sometimes God puts people in our lives, people that we'd never think we had much to learn from, to teach us to have faith. Sometimes parents need to learn to have simple trust in God from their children. Sometimes people that have been around the church for decades and they know the Bible backward and forward, they need to learn about faith in God, that God will do miracles through me, through people that have just been baptized, they're babies in Christ. You know, going on to Matthew 17, Jesus takes Peter, along with John and James, up to the Mount of Transfiguration, where they see Moses and Elijah. And Jesus gives them a peek, so to speak, behind the spiritual curtain to see what's really going on in the spiritual world. And this is something that is literally and figuratively a mountaintop experience for Peter and the others. Must have built his faith incredibly. And you know, sometimes God gives us experiences like that as well. Conferences, seminars, books, and we need to take advantage of them every chance we get. Because just like Peter, we need mountaintop experiences to build our faith. Jesus puts those in our life for a reason. So Jesus never gave up on Peter. And he will do the same thing with us. He will keep on giving us lessons and experiences. He will never graduate us from his school of faith until the day that we die. You know, as we conclude, I want to tell a story, an experience from my own life. And this is something that happened even before I became a Christian, but it's something that I've always looked back on. It taught me something very important about the principle of getting out of the boat, having faith. Now, at the time, I wasn't even applying it to faith. I wasn't a Christian at all. But looking back, I can see God was teaching me a principle of how to have faith and get out of the boat all through my life. In junior high school and high school, my philosophy was just to try anything, all kinds of sports, all kinds of music, anything. Half of them went pretty well. Half of them I fell flat on my face on. But I just wanted to try everything. In junior high school, I played football, and I just loved it. It was so much fun. And that was in California, but I moved to Florida for high school. And I got there, and the high school was huge. It was like more than 2,000 kids, just 10th and 11th, 12th, not 4 years like now. And all the kids just seemed so huge. And I really wanted to play football, but I was so afraid of trying out and not making the team and just embarrassing myself. I just didn't want to fail. So in 10th grade, 11th grade, I didn't try out. My senior year, I decided this is my last chance, and if I don't try now, I'm going to regret it for the rest of my life, never knowing whether I could have made the team or not. So I tried out, and I ended up making the team, and I was just so happy. At that time, I was second string, but that was totally okay with me. But what happened is that shortly before the season was going to start, the person who was first string ahead of me hurt his leg. So I was moved up to first string, and it was like, wow, my dream come true, getting to start on my high school football team. I was just so happy. As the season went on, things went well for me. And by the end of the season, I was chosen as the defense MVP, and then I was selected to the first team, all-conference team as well. Now, we have all kinds of musicians and artists and sports people and scholars in our church, and I know that that's not much compared to what many people have done. But for me, at that time, that was like I was on the top of the world. This is a dream come true, something I never could have asked for. And honestly, when I tell the story, I feel a little bit like I'm bragging, and I'm sorry about that. But I tell it for a specific reason, and that is that God was teaching me something that I've never forgotten all of my life, and I've applied that to my Christian experience. And that is that my greatest fear should be never knowing what God might have done through me if I just would have gotten out of the boat. I don't want to get to the end of my life and look back with regrets. What might have been if I just would have gotten out of the boat? And I think God, in one way or another, has taught that same lesson to every one of us at different points in our life. So I hope the passage that we've read tonight about Peter has inspired you to think about what it means for you to get out of the boat. And my recommendation is that you decide something specific and talk to someone and share that with someone and hold each other accountable for something specific that you're going to do to get out of the boat. If you've gotten out of the boat and failed, like, again, I have so many times in my life, I hope that you've been reminded that Jesus is still with you. He still believes in you. He still wants you to get up out of the water and start walking. He's still saying, come, I'm right here. Thank you so much for being with me tonight. I hope that everyone has a great week. Thank you.